Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to our monthly webinar. Today, Dr. John Crumpets will be discussing how to use catch physical activity to positively address neurologically based behavioural problems. My name is Peter Cribb, and I'm the National Director for the Catch Program with the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living at the University of Texas School of Public Health, Austin Regional Campus. We're very excited about today's webinar, but before we get started, I would like to take care of a little housekeeping. First of all, our webinar today is being recorded, and an archive will be made available on the catchusa.org website. That will be tomorrow, along with the PDF of the presentation slides. During today's webinar, we encourage you to type in questions and comments via the questions box, which you can access through the control panel on your screen. You can type in your questions at any time, but to keep us on schedule, we'll try to hold off answering them until the Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. When typing your questions into the questions box, be sure to select the option to send your message to all attendees. Next, I'd like to let you know a little bit about the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living. We are an international leader in conducting research and providing programs that promote healthy living for children, their families, and communities. Our work fosters improved health behaviours among the youth, influences policy and environmental change to support healthy living, and advances professional education and community service. Our vision is healthy children in a healthy world. You can find out more about our centre and our work in school health on our website, www.msdcentre.org. It is now my pleasure to introduce our guest today, Dr. John Crumpets. Dr. Crumpets is a 40-year veteran of the health and physical education profession. He has experience at every level on the educational continuum. John is recognised within his profession as an expert on the psychological effects of sport and fitness activities on children's physical and emotional development. John speaks to us today from first-hand experience, not only as a public health educator, but as a child care director. Welcome, Dr. Crumpets. And before you begin, John, would you mind sharing a little bit about how you became interested in this issue?
Thank you, Peter. Well, first of all, I'm a parent of a child who was diagnosed with autism, and my daughter is now 34 years old, and we have seen the development and even the changes that have occurred over time, and as a parent trying to understand those behaviors. And most recently, as a result of being a child care director and working with children on a daily basis, I had been out of direct care of children or in the teaching profession for quite a while. So I was quite surprised and even alarmed at the number of children that we saw that had neurological issues that affected their behavior and also even affected our being able to deliver a quality program. So I'm going to be talking to you today as someone who's not necessarily an expert, but someone who has, as a matter of reading and attending workshops and digging for information and firsthand knowledge of what seemed to work in our child care center, and sharing that information with you. Before I go forward, I want to recognize Phil Farrar. Phil is the Executive Director of the Association of Neurologically Impaired Children. It's based in Dallas, Texas, and Phil came to our center in Cedar Park and conducted 3 yearly trainings with our staff and the community. And he was a great resource and help in helping us create accessible environments for these kids, and also to understand their behaviors and understand the challenges that they faced every day. So, so today what we're going to do is, you can see on the agenda, we're going to talk about the diagnosis for neurologically impaired children, identify the rage cycle and behavioral triggers, cover some techniques that aid in behavior changes, and then finally put a spotlight on how catch physical education strategies help to create a safe and productive environment, positive environment for these kids. Starting off, basically, neurologically impaired children are those who seem to possess process information and stimuli differently. They lack coping skills. They have faulty perceptions of their environment. Many people identify them as time bombs that can go off at any minute. Now, you're going to see a wide variation when we talk about these neurologically impaired children. What's difficult is there's such a wide variation in their behaviors. For instance, we've all probably seen a kid who goes into a tantrum, a behavioral tantrum or a rage, and that's the physical manifestation of when they're truly they get to the point of frustration and they don't have the skills to control their behavior. The other end of the spectrum is someone who actually shuts down, and we've also, as teachers and child care providers, seen children and experienced children who simply in the middle of an activity or for whatever reason that we cannot determine, they just simply stop, and they may even flop down on the floor. They're not going to get up from a seat, and that is a passive form of a meltdown. There's some of the common primary diagnoses of neurologically impaired children, and they often carry more than one diagnosis that can include learning disabilities and developmental disorders. For instance, my daughter's initial diagnosis was autism, and then Asperger's started popping up. As she got older, she started showing some signs of some bipolar disorder. So you've all known children who may have had a diagnosis and they seem perfectly fine, and they operate in the world and function in the world quite nicely. And then you'll see other kids who have very, very low level of coping skills. The difficulty that we dealt with in our child care center was that no two children are alike. So if you've met one child with Asperger's, you've met one child with Asperger's. The diagnosis has to be understood in connection with the child's personality, and often the personality of the child, while they may display some negative behaviors or negative personality characteristics, those characteristics would have been there in the absence of any diagnosis of neurological impairment. So as you'll see, we talk about this through the presentation. Learning to deal with the issue is a special challenge for adults because there are so many manifestations of those behaviors and so many different solutions to those behaviors also. Now, scientists have hypothesized that neurological neurotransmitter imbalances within the brain causes psychiatric conditions, and these imbalances are what cause children to lose control. It's not about manipulation, and it's not about misbehavior. If we look at kind of an imbalance leads to from the low-end behavior to the raging behaviors and everything in between, these children all have issues with sensory input. That may be the amount of light or noise in the room. Other characteristics could be anxiousness, inattentiveness, black and white thinking, unable to, and that black and white thinking attributes them to not understanding logic. They have poor communication skills, poor time management, physical and verbal behaviors that are out of control, as well as social skills deficit. For instance, and the common thread there is it's sensory based. It could be visual, auditory, or tactile. All of you have known or may have run into children who have a real issue with clothing, the way that clothing feels on their skin. My daughter did not like to take showers. That was a real issue because of the way the water felt on her skin. We had another little boy who had to have pieces of torn paper. He would tear pieces of paper up, and this included coloring books, instructions to games, flyers that we had, promotional flyers that we had for our business in the front. He was obsessed with going and tearing pieces of paper and holding them in his hand during the day. We had another young lady who, going into the gym, she was obsessed with purple, the color purple, and she had to, if there were any purple chairs in the gym, she had to go and arrange those chairs together. And at lunch, if she didn't have a purple chair, it was a big issue. And it seems like a small thing until you get 80 kids in a lunchroom and every chair is going to be taken for lunch, and Savannah can't find a purple chair, and then we have a meltdown, which causes problems for everybody. And finally, maybe the most severe case that we saw was a young kindergartner who came to us and had been kicked out of every other child care center, with the solution at the child care center that if you give him, I'll just use, it's not his name, but Cody, we'll use the name Cody. If Cody comes with a Game Boy, then he can stay in the child care center. And his parents obviously did not want that. So when he came to us, a very intelligent kid, but he would roam around the gym on all fours like an animal, and he thought he was a velociraptor. So Cole would become quite violent because he thought he was a dinosaur. But that's the way that he handled his environment initially. Okay. Now, it's not about manipulation or misbehaving. Don't assume that these kids can control their behavior. And punishment doesn't work. You know, you can punish a neurologically impaired child all you want, but they still have the manifestations of the chemical imbalance. Taken to another level, you can punish a child in a wheelchair, but they still can't walk, all right? And that rewarded punishment, if you try to get into the punishment side, what you're doing is punishing them for a skill that they do not have. And again, that just adds to the anxiety in their life and may lead to another meltdown. Neurologically impaired children often are children who produce the opposite of compassion, even though we know that they don't have the skills to control their behavior. One of the best examples was when Phil's workshop with us. He started off by painting a picture of you're being in a restaurant and you see a child walk in, and that child may be on crutches or in a wheelchair, and it's apparent that they have a chronic physical disability. And he asked the audience to imagine how they would feel about that child. He said, then you're sitting down and you're having dinner, and you hear this other child in the back, the other part of the restaurant, and they're screaming and telling their mom no. They're just, no, they're not going to eat that. And there is an issue. The child may get up, run around the restaurant. They may bang on the table. They may knock over a glass of water or something. And he said, how do you feel about that child? And of course, the common reaction is, why can't the mother get the child to settle down? That child should know better. Somebody should teach him. So we tend to have the opposite reaction to neurologically impaired children when they act out, when in fact they are just like that child in the wheelchair or on crutches. They are truly disabled and they cannot control their behavior because they don't have the neurological connections to do it, or they haven't developed the skills. Now there's a predictable cycle, pretty predictable, and especially what we've observed in our center. And in phase one, usually these kids are typically cooperative in their behavior. They're part of the group and having fun, even if they're kind of on the fringe, or they may be wandering around, they may not be paying attention. It's the ADHD that's happening, or it's the Asperger's where they don't quite relate well to the other kids, but they're still part of the group. A trigger often is a change in routine. It's something that's provoked by another student. They're overstimulated by light or noise, especially noise. Noise is a big issue. And especially in the gym, in any kind of a game, it could be something that has to do with competition. As a educator or a child care provider, when you start to understand you're looking for those triggers, and you know the trigger's coming. For instance, you know you're going into the gym and you're getting ready to play a game. What you want to do is you want to try to prepare the child and let them know what's coming. Be mindful, very mindful of your tone of voice. Be very calm in your body language, and watch their body language, and acknowledge any frustration they have about they just don't want to do this. So your response is to create kind of a security blanket and let them know that you're there to support, and any decision that they want to make about participating or not, or anything that you can do to remove the trigger. In other words, if they are sitting next to someone who's real loud, all it takes is acknowledging their frustration and move them, for instance. When we go to phase two, now we're starting to see more behavioral manifestations or signs that the child is becoming very frustrated. There's a change in the facial expressions. They're shouting, pacing, rocking back and forth. They're really fixating on the problem. They're angered, and you're asking them maybe to refocus, but they're going back, they keep going back. You move a child from sitting next to one child and they get up and they wander back to that same child. You know probably that you're getting ready for an issue. In this case, you want to make sure, again, that you try to redirect the child, be very supportive, and offer other choices, such as taking a break, run an errand, or use echoing. Now, echoing we found to be a very, very good and effective strategy. And echoing involves expressing the child's core message right back to them, either in their own words or the child's words. So in the earlier example of Cody, and Cody was very explosive behaviorally, Cody, he grit his teeth and he'd start talking and he'd say, "I'm really mad." So you'd say, "Well, you're mad. You're really mad, Cody." Yes. And then he might go on to tell you why he's mad. You tell him back, "You're mad because." So all you're doing is mirroring, you're echoing. You don't ask him why, or don't ask him what he could do in that situation. You're simply echoing, because they can't answer they can't answer what they would do, and they can't tell you why necessarily they're getting angry. They just know they're feeling that sensorily, they're feeling that frustration, and this is the way they're communicating with you that they're trying to do something about it. When you get to the full rage cycle, if they start physically raging, then you're in a safety mode. They're out of control. You want to make sure that you prevent any harm to others. You want to make sure that they don't run and get away from you. It's okay to leave the classroom, but obviously under supervision. This is very, very difficult for neurologically impaired children who have maybe physically hurt another student or damaged property. It's real hard to keep your cool, but this is just the time that you need to be that calm, comforting voice to the person. You know, we saw more outbursts of this raging, physical raging from the younger children. We didn't see as much from the older children. It's as if the older they get, they're better able to understand, and maybe those coping skills develop better over time as they get more to it. You know, fourth, fifth grade, where they're approaching that stage developmentally, where they're getting out of the egocentric stage and they're starting to deal with intentionality and understand that. So the little kids, when they physically rage, although they can still do good, you know, they can hurt, they can hit and hurt, and they can damage property. But it's the older ones we worried about. For the older kids, we immediately tried to get another adult's help, and what we did was kind of corral and parallel. We never put our hands on the child. It was a time to be very calming, and it's okay, Joe. Everything's going to be fine. We're here to help you. What can we do to help? And ultimately, they would usually cool down. In some instances with the little ones, we'd even have to restrain, but only those who are trained to physically restrain a child were allowed to do so. I've had little kindergarten kids throw chairs across the room. So again, the little ones can hurt, but if you want to have someone in your facility who is able to restrain, make sure that you get professional training to do so. Now, the recovery period after the rage is really interesting. As the slide says, you need to watch out for another outburst, but usually these kids, by this time, they've spent themselves. And let me go back. Part about the rage is you don't want to address children's issue with rage, as you may have seen on the slide, because their IQ level goes down about 30 points. They really don't have the intellectual capacity at that time to deal with any kind of other information. At this time, they don't either. This is not the time that you want to try to deal with their behavior or talk about options. This is the time that you just want to provide a comfortable setting so they can literally come down emotionally. During this time, you'll see, and again, you've probably seen children who go to sleep and they fall into this really deep sleep, to the point where it's really difficult even to wake them up if their parents show up 30 or 40 minutes later after the episode. Now, during this time, they're also, when they come back out of that rage and they've had time to cool down, most are quite devastated that they failed again. They know that they failed. They don't understand why they failed. They don't understand why they couldn't control it. They just know that they couldn't control themselves. And they'll be almost a very tender and loving relationship with the person who they even hurt, or the adult that they even hurt, because often they can't even remember what happened. We had a young man who separated from the group one day and went and stood in the corner of the gym. We could not get him to move from the corner of the gym. He stood there for 2 full hours with his nose in the corner. When he finally came out of the corner because it was lunch, and we invited him to come eat lunch and he could go back to the corner, we asked him, hey Joe, what, could you give us some information, just a little bit of, information so we could help you. So did somebody yell at you, or did you have an argument with somebody? He had this beautiful, angelic face. He looked up with a frown and he thought for a minute and he said, I don't remember. So he didn't even remember what it was that caused him the frustration to act out for those 2 hours. Okay. Now we're getting back to the daily routine, and the daily routine may be the next day. Often when these children acted out and by the time their parents came, we talked to the parents, of course, and communicated what had happened and sought their input and discussed a strategy that they would use when they went home to discuss this with the child. And then when they came in the next day is the day that we start talking about, better options. And we start talking about feelings of frustration. Do you remember how you felt? And when you feel that way, what can you do that would help you deal with that? We did this even in the absence of problems the day before. We tried to be as diligent as we could in having a conversation prior to the class or prior to the day with the child, identifying how we're very happy and really excited that they're back today, and we're looking forward to a good day, and what are we going to do. So we kind of reviewed what was going to happen. Also, many of these kids need some kind of a reminder. For instance, Cody, the little kid who thought he was a velociraptor. Cody, at 5 years old, could identify every dinosaur, I think, on the books. He would come into the office and he would tell me the name of the dinosaur he was interested in that day, and he could then spell it because I couldn't. And then we would print off a picture of the dinosaur for Cody to carry around with him during the day. Sometimes he'd carry it around with him, and other times he'd take it and he'd put it in his backpack. But eventually became a source of comfort for Cody when we saw the trigger, when something was happening where he was being rebuffed by a person that he wanted to be his friend, or competition. He knew he was facing a game of sorts, or he couldn't go to the Lego table because it wasn't his time to go to the Lego table. We would ask him to go get his picture of his dinosaur and come tell us about that dinosaur, and he would, and that would be one of the ways that we would redirect him. Now, traditional reward and punishment for these kids doesn't work. I've mentioned this before. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but the common assumptions for many parents and many teachers and child care workers is that these kids are attention-seeking, or they're seeking reward, they have a lack of motivation and discipline, or they're trying to be manipulative. Again, it's very, very difficult. I'm sorry if I, trying to say and infer that what people should be doing, and it's not that. It's just that, I had to overcome the misconception that I had about these kids' behaviors being intentional. And I had to stop believing that the cause of the behavior was a lack of skills. You've got to learn to react with a lot of compassion and truly believe that it's a result of delayed or missing skills caused by the disability. So the raging is a form of communication, even at the lowest level, when kids maybe talk back, or they seem to be dismissive, or they walk away. That is they're communicating to you that they're frustrated. So the raging is also a form of frustration. And it's not an attack on you or any others necessarily. This is extremely difficult for us to develop that reframing, which is the next slide. And our reframing about these kids, part of it is that we're there to help manage and not cure. I believe that if we worked real hard, if we got everybody in the system on the same page, that we could help cure these kids, and we can't. It's always a management issue. Their disability is never going to go away. again, I want to repeat that. The disability that they have, the sensory disability, is never going to go away. What we help them do is to build skills to handle that frustration and learn more productive ways to communicate. You'll see it, one of the topics there is logic doesn't work, but bargaining does. Logic with a kid who thinks they have to be first in line because it's a frustration for them, or it triggers some frustration when they're not in line or they get cut out of line, is, you know, it's not going to be, logic doesn't work. Well, you know, everybody needs to have a chance to share and be first. Well, they don't understand that. It's not logical to them. Logic, it's about frustration. So, well, let's bargain. How about on Mondays? On Mondays and Fridays, you can be first in line. Or Mondays you can be first in line, and Fridays you can be first to go get a drink of water. And you'll find that often they will comply and say, okay, that's good. That's a good bargain. Again, you have to learn to give in, and that's probably number one. Reframing begins with that accessible environment, and that means ignoring non-safety issues and learning to give in. And again, that's hard because we think as teachers, if we're giving in to this behavior, then we're reinforcing the behavior. And again, that's not the case. So I've covered a lot of what we've talked about so far. The reframing begins with this accessible environment, and you can see we've talked about the non-issue safety issues, give in, no punishment, remove the triggers. The one on the bottom, be a positive friend, is real important because many of these kids don't have a lot of friends, and a lot of that has to do with with the Asperger's and the autistic behaviors. They just don't understand relationships to the point where they're very honest about what they see and what they observe in the environment, and often that honesty is perceived by other kids as being rude or hurtful. So you're being a positive friend and developing a non-supervisory relationship with the kids is real important. What's going on at home? What hobbies do they like? Playing catch with them, sitting down and having lunch with them. It goes a long, long way to help when there is a problem or where there is a rage incident. It really is takes that relationship often will be the deciding factor in whether or not a child does have a meltdown or a rage or goes into a hurtful or a situation where they hurt other kids. One of the things too about incentives, we used a lot of incentives in our child care program. Every single day we gave awards out to kids, and there was a problem with that with many of the neurologically impaired children, because if they didn't get an award, they didn't feel like they had a good day. So often they would even solicit an award and come and tell you the good things that they did that day. And again, it was hard to think, well, all I'm doing is it's not really fair because if they get an award every day. But in fact, we understood that no, what we were doing is helping them understand that they did have a good day and that they probably did deserve an award. What we did was we pulled the incentives back in terms of tangible incentives, the actual little trinkets that we gave them, and we went more to verbal acknowledgments every day. So we would then verbally acknowledge kids, have them stand up and verbally acknowledge the good things that they did, and that worked really well with starting to helping the children feel safe in that physical activity environment. So the reframing is, to review real quick, reframing our issues with rage is its communication. They're frustrated. When they shut down, it's about being overwhelmed. What is really heartwarming to us was the other kids get it. When kids see neurologically impaired children getting a break or being able to do things maybe that they weren't able to do, when we explain to the kids that, well, you know, Cody's working on that, and he needs help from all of us. He needs our understanding that, and all of you boys and girls know, and you've seen Cody, he gets angry and he gets really frustrated, and we're trying to help him learn a better way to deal with it. They get it. There's not a problem. What we found was with counselors and with other parents who their children may have had an incident with a neurologically impaired child, we as adults have more problems with it than their peers do. So reframing is everybody's job, and it has to do with stabilizing the environment, working on triggers, removing them and identifying and removing them, and then slowly adding those back. We've really talked about the first three bullets on that slide. We just really don't have time to go into adding those triggers back, and that could be a year or a 2-year process for that to happen. So overall, if we kind of go around the circle here, thinking about no punishment for children, we're going to get away from thinking that we have to punish this behavior. It's about learning, reframing, and understanding why they're acting the way they are. We're going to accept that the child is not in control, that it's not something that they have to learn, it's skills that need to be developed. We're going to practice echoing, stay cool, and the final one is having a godly level of patience. Before I go on and jump to the next topic, just to quickly review all of that, is how difficult it is to work with these kids, because as I said, every kid is an individual, and they're going to develop, display manifestations of this sensory deficit in different ways. What does work is a comprehensive, systemic approach where all the counselors in our center went to the workshops. We all discussed on a regular basis our dealing with kids that are neurologically impaired. We worked closely with the schools, and that was a big positive, is the schools to let us know, in the special ed department especially, if someone had a bad day or what was going on at school. If the kids were in school suspension, we communicated closer with them. And finally, the parents. God bless the parents of neurologically impaired children, because they are so wanting to look for that holy grail, that magic pill, and it just does not exist. Every kid's different, and it takes a lot of work on a daily basis, and from our organization, a systemic basis to address those behaviors. And we experienced good progress with these kids. With that type of an approach, we were seeing kids being able to develop those skills and function more frequently and positively in our child care environment. So let's jump to Catch. Formal playtime. Anytime, Catch is all about creating environments where kids can be successful, and we want to make sure that the kids who are neurologically impaired can also be successful in a physical activity setting. The Catch teaching strategies are all based on creating predictable routines and signals for children to understand what will happen next, and that is really huge for these kids. So we have very clear stop and start signals, and we allow for delayed compliance. If you want to get in line, that neurologically impaired child is off somewhere, it's okay, we're going to get him back. We're going to clap 3 times, and we want the kids to clap back to us, and we might do that 3 or 4 times before they get their attention. We're going to often, boys and girls, if you can hear my voice, clap once. If you want to have a good time today, clap twice. If you want to play with someone and have a partner in a game, clap 3 times. So that's another example. By the 3rd time, we usually have that neurologically impaired child's attention. We focus on when before the what. What's going to happen when I say something, then we're going to go do it. Again, it's very, very important for the neurologically impaired child, because it prepares them. They start listening. Well, when you say, what am I going to do? So you've got their attention. We start with instant activity. So when they enter the activity area, they're immediately active, and they're not put in situations where they're sitting down next to someone who might cause a problem. Catch does not employ elimination games. So we're not eliminating kids. That's a big competitive issue, is neurologically impaired kids being in a game. If they're being eliminated, then they've done something wrong. People don't like them, and that's a huge frustration. Challenge by choice is just what it says. Often in a skill situation, it's how high you can throw, how far you can run, how softly you can throw a ball to somebody. So it's all about giving them the opportunity to choose at what level they're going to play. Again, in tag games and gotcha games, if they're tagged, they get to go out and do some kind of activity and come back in. And of course, in concise instructional cues with expectations. Now, one thing as you read this slide about the Catch approach, remember that what is your strength is also your weakness. One of the great things about the CATCH program and physical activity programs is it offers, or a good physical activity program, is it offers this open environment where neurologically impaired children really get to roam, and especially for ADD kids, ADHD kids, this is a great environment because, and we were told by the schools that we tended to be, kids liked us, and we got a reputation as being a good environment for neurologically impaired children, so because of our program. At the same time, what you're doing is you're putting those kids into game situations and activities that are for sure going to trip some triggers. So, like I said at the beginning, there's no holy grail, there's no secret pill. But the open environment with a CATCH approach to physical activity, we found was huge in terms of helping those kids feel successful in that physical activity setting. And that carried over into all of the other parts of the program in the building, because kids generally, play is the work of children. And if they feel safe and productive and successful in a playful environment, then that just helps with their own feelings of being safe and their own self-esteem, and ultimately will lead to them being able to develop those skills to handle those frustrations. So, again, the CATCH routines, being active, ensuring that everybody understands the expectations, playing cooperatively, and supporting individual and team success, as I said, was a huge factor and a foundation really of our program in dealing with these kids and helping them feel successful. So ultimately, we want to provide a quality learning experience for all of these children, and understanding the unique challenges they face each day and how to structure the learning environment to meet their needs was a daily focus and effort on our part.
Great, thanks, Dr. John. I've just with a couple of questions coming in here. One I'd like to just broach with you, if I may, at the moment. You talked about a systems approach. We talked about communication with your counsellors and also the parents. Could you provide me with a little bit of an example of what that might look like working with the parents?
Well, you know, we had parents that obviously for the more severe cases, the parents were aware of and understood that their child was a special child, and they needed special accommodations. So just understanding what was going on at home and how they approached the issues at home, and knowing that we each would be saying the same thing to the child. Okay, so if there was an incident during the child care, and we immediately made sure that the parent understood what happened, and we also being able to counsel the parent when we knew, if we determined or thought that the parent may be someone who was going to punish the child for their behavior, that we could intercept that and say, no, it's not about punishment, it's about helping them to develop the skills. Let's talk about what are you going to say to them at home, so tomorrow when they come in, we can say the same thing to them. And that same communication with the schools, when we were able to work with the special ed department at schools, and they were able to, especially if there was a severe incident at school, and they could send it to us. But we got regular 6-week reports from the special ed teachers at the school to be able that let us know the progress that was being made, or the special issues that were going on. They might have a specific problem. For instance, this one kid, Cody, he was doing okay in the classroom, but when they went into an open recess play time is when they really started having problems. And we saw the same thing. We were figuring, halfway through the structured day it was fine, but when we went to that open play and free play time at the end of the day is when we really started having problems. So we were able to circumvent that and disallow that from happening. So it's the systemic approach is what the kids, everybody's talking to the kid the same way. Everybody's dealing with their rages the same way. They're referring them to someone in the building who has the skills to be able to take care of them if needed. That's ultimately, I think, was the power behind our being able to have a positive effect on the kids. Okay.
Got a question here, John. Have you or could you use the term neuroatypical behaviour rather than neurologically impaired. Have you heard that term before?
I've heard several different terms. I used neurologically impaired simply because that was the term that seemed to make not necessarily sense, but it just, I attached to it, and it was part of Phil Farrar's association named neurologically impaired children. When you, in the literature right now, what's difficult or kind of challenging is there are so many different, as I said, so many different answers or so many different suggestions as to how, even with the terminology, I don't have any problem with identifying. I understand, and I can emotionally understand how impairment may not be necessarily a good term if we come up with something else, but it seemed that in the discipline it just seems to change over time based upon what the new research might evolve.
Sure. Thanks. And here's a very good question. Whenever we go into gymnasiums these days, I mean, I can't believe the technology they still echo greatly.
Yes.
I've got a question here. Is found students with sensory integration issues have problems with the sound in the gym. You know, what would you do in the gym where we have these issues?
We had kids with earplugs.
Really?
Yes, we did, and we would save often the wax earplugs that you use for swimming in the summer. We would have an abundance of those that were left and lost and found, and so we would use those for the kids, and we would invite the kids to use them. All right. Now again, you know, some kids don't need them. You know, why give them out? But our position was, if a child, anything that we could do to you know, provide comfort to the child, and so that they would participate. But the ones that we knew had a problem with sound, we would offer it to them, and they would use them. Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. Going forward, John, question here about workshops that might be available for folks to you know, acquire these skills working with the kids.
Again, if you want a resource that we use, again, is Philip Farrar's Association for Neurologically Impaired Children. They do workshops around the state. Dr. John's Training, which is a business that my wife and I have put together since we've been in the business, the child care business. We're developing workshops that address, and any general workshops are very specific workshops to specific neurological issues. We also offer those.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's, as we know, Catch is in quite a few after-school sites across the country, and here's a question on establishing their own way of, and they have established their own way of dealing with neurologically impaired children, which usually boils down to them being excluded from the activities. How do you think we as coordinators should address this?
As coordinators from...
Oh, sorry, I might have read that wrong. I guess as a coordinator at one of the after-school sites with their staff that perhaps, I guess, don't have those skills or knowledge as yet to...
Well, that's kind of what we're doing here, is trying to start addressing that issue.
Yeah, yeah.
But I agree. We're in beginning the process of just trying to do that. Especially my experience with the after school with the child care industry is it's a lot of kids, and in many cases profit driven. So it's in tight spaces. It's unfortunate, but there's just a lack of understanding of these children, and also a dire need for education in the child care industry about the importance of creating those accessible environments. They're just, right now, so many are just not equipped to handle it. I don't have a better answer than that. Yeah.
Very good. Well, John, thank you so much for being with us today, and certainly your work over the past 40 years as an educator in public schools, as a university professor, and as a child care director. I think as one of your colleagues said last week, Dr. John has definitely left his footprint, or should I say sneaker print, on the hearts of many. This concludes our webinar today. We'll be back next year. Until then, I wish you all a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and a fantastic New Year. Bye for now.